Welcome to Democracy Dialogues, a conversation we need to be having now about the state of democracy in the Americas. I'm Eric Farnsworth, and I'm delighted to be your series host for more than 2 years now, bringing together the most pressing democracy issues in the Americas on the first Thursday of each month. Find us on YouTube or watch past episodes at as-coa.org/Democracy Dialogues. So often, we and others focus on the problems of democracy. Today, we are focusing on a democratic success, Costa Rica, a nation in a troubled neighborhood that nonetheless continues to perform admirably. And we are focusing on ways that outside nations, including the United States, can meaningfully and tangibly support democratic partners in the Americas. That doesn't mean there are not difficulties or stresses: migration from troubled countries, drug trafficking and crime, economic downturns, the Trojan horse of Chinese investment, social media and disinformation. But where others have stumbled, tempted either by populism or authoritarianism, or both, Costa Rica seems to have found the secret sauce for democratic governance. To discuss these issues, our guest today is Manuel Tovar, the Trade Minister of Costa Rica. Minister Tovar, welcome to Democracy Dialogues.
Thank you very much, Eric. Such a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you with us. What's the secret sauce for Costa Rican democracy?
Well, it's a sweet sauce, I would say so. And it goes way back to the 1940s when our country took a very bold decision by abolishing our armed forces. And then one of the consequences was to allocate taxpayers' money to hire teachers instead of hire generals, to buy pencils and books and not weapons. So we invested in education, we invested in our human workforce. Education is the basis of a society. In addition to that, we have built strong institutions providing universal health care to the Costa Rican people and even those seeking refugee in our country. We have also committed to protect our natural environment. Today, around 50% of our country is under some sort of environmental reserve protection. And at the same time, we have embraced a very open trade agenda since the beginning of our republic back in the early 1800s. Our economy developed through trade, exporting coffee beans to Europe. Coffee beans that I am aware that you enjoy quite a bit.
Too much, I'm afraid.
Too much. And followed by other agricultural commodities as sugar, as banana, pineapple. But we have shifted over time and sophisticated our economy, transforming it into a much more diverse and upscale economy. We went from exporting plantain chips to microchips. Intel's arrival to Costa Rica not only spurred, that sort of advanced manufacturing, but it has also helped us advance in preparing our human workforce into much more sophisticated tasks. So I would say that strong institutions, commitment to democracy, to human rights, to the principle of rule of law are part of that secret sauce. And it's been more than 7 decades that we have continued consistently living under those parameters.
You know, it's interesting because normally when we have conversations on democracy issues in the region, people mention social development and they mention rule of law and they mention institutions and they mention various issues. They tend not to mention necessarily economic growth and the importance of growing economies. You clearly have put that squarely within the context of support for democracy. Tell us more about that. What's the role of economic growth in terms of supporting democracy, and then we'll get to ways to generate that growth.
Well, listen, when you bake a cake or a pie, certainly you need a set of ingredients, as I mentioned: rule of law, human rights, democracy. But also to foster and seek economic growth, that's fundamental. Because at the end of the day, if our citizens don't have a way or means of improving their livelihoods, then you create a bigger problem, and that erodes democracy. Democracy is also about providing, job opportunities. Democracy is also about ensuring that your people have the means to scale up, to grow up, in terms of economic development. So we understood that very early on as well, and over the last 30 to 40 years, we have, consistently opened up to the world, because for a small economy like Costa Rica, that's the way to go. We have no other means. We have a small market. We're only 5 million people, and we're very much integrated into the world economy. So that's why we continue, to pursue Costa Rica's integration into the global markets. Trade, foreign direct investment, those are fundamental drivers to create not only wealth, but also to level up our people, to create a social inclusion that fits to most of our people. Of course, we have some challenges. We still have some levels of poverty, not those that we see and face, that other countries in the region are facing, and that we're trying to revert. But as you see, the levels of poverty in my country, they have dramatically diminished as we have integrated ourselves into the global economy.
It's really interesting that you're talking about integration into the global economy, because people think about that in the context of the larger countries, certainly the United States or China, Europe, et cetera, Japan. Not oftentimes in terms of smaller economies, and yet you're clearly centering this as a key for Costa Rica's future development. Tell us a couple of the initiatives that you have been involved with. Of course, the trade agenda with Asia and with North America that we can get to, but OECD, some of these issues. People don't necessarily think of countries in the global south in this context, but Costa Rica has made a meaningful approach in that direction, no?
Well, if there's any other recipe, any other way to go,
yeah.
I'll be pleased to learn about it. But in our case, it is certainly through these sort of international engagements that we have been able and successful in pursuing reforms, long overdue reforms. CAFTA allowed us to finally, after years, decades of having a state-owned monopoly in telecom and insurance, we were able to open up those markets to the benefit of the Costa Rican people. Now they have a wider array of providers at a much lower price. So that's what trade brings. Certainly our accession to the OECD after nearly 7 years of long overdue reforms and very ambitious reforms, we succeeded in finally joining the club of the serious nations. Some call them the club of rich nations, but we're far from being rich, and others there have also even a smaller GDP as Costa Rica's. But it is a set of it's a community of countries that understand that it is through structural reforms that they can advance in creating and fostering policies that improve the lives and livelihoods of their own people. But certainly also we're advancing our government. We've been in office for a year and a half so far. We came up with a very strong and ambitious trade agenda to continue bringing more of Costa Rica into the world and more of the world into Costa Rica. We have recently signed our free trade agreement with Ecuador. We are in the process, actually this week, we're negotiating under the second round of negotiations with the UAE, soon to start with Israel, a country that has a lot to offer in terms of innovation. We need a lot of innovation. Latin America needs a lot of innovation to make that leap into that development that we much need. We're soon, hopefully, to start engaging in discussions under the DIPA, Digital Economy Partnership Agreement. And of course, we have made our case to be part of the CPTPP, where Japan is. We have trade relations under preferential schemes with 6 of the 7 G7 economies, but Japan. So I am aware that there's a lot of sympathy for Costa Rica. And of course, we have made even a bolder move by, we haven't been shy, by saying that Costa Rica fits in the USMCA, along with the other 3 OECD economies. Our economy has changed. The world has changed. The region has changed, for good and bad, since we negotiated CAFTA. So I think that, you know, coming and bringing ourselves more into the trade platform in the world, in the global markets, that's the way that, in the case of Costa Rica, has created jobs, quality jobs, and has a faster FDI coming into my country.
For those who may not know, the CPTPP is the successor to the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Exactly.
With the similar countries that the United States chose not to enter back in 2017.
With Britain now,
Yes.
United Kingdom just recently joined.
And Costa Rica has made formal application, as have other countries like Uruguay and others.
Yeah, China, Taiwan, Uruguay, Ecuador, and Costa Rica. I
Yeah.
understand also Ukraine has made its bid.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certainly, you know, our pitch and our request to those members of the bloc is that we understand that there are sensitivities around some of those applications, but, you know, there's appetite for them to grow, to have this family grow. And we expect and we hope that they can consider other applications as ours, you know, while they decide what they do with the rest. Otherwise, the bloc will be stalled.
I've written that one of the greatest strategic mistakes that the United States has made in memory has been the withdrawal or the refusal to go forward into the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So I certainly hope that other countries are able to take advantage and gain the benefits of entrance into that agreement, which is a good agreement. Frankly, I wish the United States were part of it as well. As we look forward in terms of some of the next steps, the question has to arise. Costa Rica is a relatively small economy. You've just said so yourself. You're trying to play in some pretty big waters. You have a trade agreement with China already. You're talking about trying to join into an agreement with Japan. And then, of course, if accession to the US-Canada-Mexico agreement comes, USMCA comes forward for Costa Rica, you would then be linked even more closely, as you already are with CAFTA, but you would be linked more closely with North America. Are you somehow concerned that Costa Rica, in an asymmetrical relationship, would be taken advantage of? I mean, if you talk to some of the critics of trade policy, they say, well, trade is exploitative and smaller countries always lose, and, you know, this is corporations coming to take advantage of people who can't protect themselves. How do you respond to that when there are obviously going to be critics who will be afraid of how that might be positioning Costa Rica?
Well, actually, it is those corporations and big companies that have chosen Costa Rica, have trusted in Costa Rica, that have created thousands and thousands of jobs and quality jobs. So again, back to the USMCA, I think that we do have a strong case. We're just not an OECD economy as the rest of the other ones, but it is a jacket that fits us better as the tight jacket that CAFTA represents. And with all due respect, I mean, we are today as CAFTA members as Nicaragua, and our economy is far away from that one that we were back in the day. We have diversified, upscale ourselves in the medical devices industry. It's our main export product to the world when you speak about goods. And we have a flourishing industry in semiconductors. We have Intel presence, a strong presence. They just announced another big reinvestment of $2 billion in Costa Rica. So that means something. Under the Chips and Science Act, the United States has announced Costa Rica as the first, in their first announcement as a partner to continue trying to bring nearshore that sort of production into America or their neighborhood. And Costa Rica certainly plays that role. We have that experience. We're a friendly country that shares the same values of the United States. We have the talent. We have a blessed geographical location with 2 ports in the Caribbean and the Pacific coast, with puts us right away very very fast into the east and west coast of the United States, also Asia, the Pacific, and Europe. So I think we have a very interesting tax incentive regime under the free trade zone. So Costa Rica, we understand that this is Costa Rica's time. This is Latin America's time. Unfortunately, some countries in Latin America still are debating issues that we have already sorted out years ago. So we don't make a stop, we don't make pit stops. We have to continue our own way and betting on the Costa Rican country proposal, which is the one that has made us succeed in this domain.
We're here at Democracy Dialogues with the Trade Minister of Costa Rica, Manuel Tovar, who is explaining not just Costa Rica's democratic principles and successes, but also discussing how economic growth and trade expansion actively support the democracy agenda. And I want to turn to that right now because Costa Rica has been first in explicitly suggesting or requesting access to the North American Trade Agreement, the USMCA. And this is something that is, as you mentioned, a bold step and a timely step and something that I think is gaining some increasing momentum. The question I would ask you as the trade minister, what would you anticipate would be the benefits to Costa Rica if you were to have access to the USMCA? Is it worth pursuing access to this agreement?
Absolutely, yes. And Costa Rica has showcased already that we are not just committed, but also willing to play with the highest standards.
Yeah.
Our accession to the OECD, in which I was involved, took us quite a while, but it demanded us to undertake a long and ambitious road of reforms, path of reforms. Some of them very painful politically, but we managed, and we continue through that way, trying to enhance more and foster more reforms in our country. So I think that Costa Rica is not afraid. We're a small country, but we usually punch above our weight, and I think that we are in a very good position, and we're very much committed to play under the highest standards on labor, environment, intellectual property rights. So when it comes to standards, Costa Rica is always seeking more and more improvement. Second, our industry has changed. Our economy has changed to that of nearly 20 years ago when we started negotiating CAFTA. Medical devices, which is a very skillful and precision-making process, now today comprises our main export products to the world. A little bit over 40% of the goods that we export. We have become also a services economy. Digital services are more and more relevant in our export offer to the world. And the flourishing semiconductor industry that we're also looking forward to even further enhance under the Chips and Science Act by this new partnership with the United States showcases that Costa Rica is a different Costa Rica today than that one under CAFTA.
Give me a specific example before you go on. We talk about medical devices, but give us a specific example. What does that mean? So if you had heart surgery in the United States, you may have been implanted with a device that was manufactured in Costa Rica, no?
Absolutely. We produce medical devices that cover all body parts of Costa Rica, not just dental and orthopedic, but also heart valves, stents, and even silicone implants. Many products. So I think that Costa Rica has already consolidated a very solid cluster on the medical devices. Hopefully soon we'll have more and better news of some of the largest companies also looking into Costa Rica to establish and continue operating in our country.
Do you want to make some news today by mentioning who that is?
Well,
Or not.
I hope I can, but if you stay tuned for next week, you'll have some news. At the end of the day, it's not on us. It's up to the companies to announce, but we'll have some good news very soon.
Yeah.
And also on the semiconductor, we're reaching out, we're going to tour the Asian continent within the next weeks. We're having some meetings in California, here in New York and Washington. So there's much more interest in Costa Rica, as a trustworthy, resilient partner in the semiconductor industry.
What's really interesting to hear you talk is you're executing against a strategy that honestly doesn't depend on Costa Rican accession to USMCA. That would be a real benefit. That would be something to aspire to and work toward, and you are doing that. But regardless of that, you're taking the hard political decisions to move forward, to make the reforms, capture the investment that's coming from outside, whether it's North America or Asia or other regions. And that, I think, could be something that people could point to about when they say, well, could other countries maybe not replicate the Costa Rican experience, but are there lessons to be learned? That's a real lesson that others could take away from this conversation. No, I mean, don't wait for the perfect agreement to come and show itself, but take the steps and reforms now that you will benefit from whether or not the agreement comes. Is that an accurate portrayal of what you're saying?
I think it is, Eric. I think it is. I'll go back to our times of our process to join the OECD.
Yeah.
We undertook many reforms, as I mentioned, some of them politically very painful.
Yes.
But just not the destiny, but also the road towards the place where you want to get is already beneficial for your country. So I think that countries should try to look, not necessarily at the goal, but the path itself. And there's a lot of need in Latin America and the Caribbean for reforms. Unfortunately, we're witnessing some backlashes in terms of democracy. We see the advancement of organized crime in the region. The migration, Costa Rica is the epicenter of these dramatic flows of migration. Not only we have migration that comes north-south from Nicaragua, but we have all this migration coming from the south up north, from Venezuela, Ecuador, going through the mighty Darien jungle into Costa Rica, trying to go further, coming here to the United States. So we do have a dramatic situation happening in the region. At the same time that we see democracy being challenged, and we see the advancement of drug lords and drug organizations, which erode at the end of the day democracy. So only with strong institutions, only with job opportunities, you can tackle and try to neutralize these effects.
I mean, it sounds like there is a real role here for countries like the United States, not as a reward for Costa Rica. You're doing what you're doing because it's good for Costa Rica,
Absolutely.
No doubt. But you're in a tough spot. You're getting squeezed on the migration front from both north and south. You have the drug scenario because Central America is between the drug-producing countries and the drug-consuming nations of North America. You have some other issues. This would seem to be an argument in favor of, look, here's a country that's trying to do the right thing. Can we affirmatively support that? Can we find ways to not take this for granted, but actively be in conversation on how can we move forward on that? I mean, the point that you made earlier in this conversation, Mr. Minister, I think is absolutely fascinating, where, at least in terms of U.S. trade policy, Costa Rica and Nicaragua, under a brutal dictator, are treated the same because of the CAFTA-DR provisions. And what's the incentive for countries elsewhere in Latin America, for example, to take the reforms that you're describing if what the result is going to be is really no particular benefit at all? Is that a fair point to be making in this context, or is that not something that comes up in the discussions?
Well, I think it's something that the U.S. authorities should look into, because at the end of the day, the well-being of your neighbors is your own well-being.
Yes.
Just put it in this place. You have a home, right? And you're trying to sell your home. But if your neighbors have their houses with their gardens without care, no paint, then at the end of the day, it diminishes the value of your own home. So if you want to create value, if you want to create better living standards, if we want to create a sense of homeland security, you need to ensure that your neighbors are in a much better shape. Not only we share a geographical location, but we also share values. We've always been a region very much linked to the United States. So I think this goes in the interest of both. The economic empowerment and economic development of our countries is totally, absolutely linked to the United States interest. So I hope, and I'm confident, I've seen how this Americas Act, and there's this growing debate over USMCA enlargement in Washington, that this debate can continue growing so that we can have some meaningful outcomes at the end of the day. Because this is not just in our own benefits, it's in the benefit of the United States of America.
I would say growing discussions, also frankly growing momentum behind the idea of USMCA expansion, and Costa Rica clearly is positioned at the very head of that class in terms of countries that could potentially be considered in that way. We only have a couple minutes remaining, and I'd like to shift the conversation from North America to the other significant economy, well, one of the significant economies in the world, in Asia. Costa Rica has an interesting relationship with China, and I'm not going to ask you to go into any sort of diplomatic conversations or anything like that. But this has been a complicating factor, at least in the context of U.S. relations with the region and all of these issues. How should we in Washington be viewing China's activities in the Western Hemisphere? Is this really a commercial relationship that's primarily built on exports and imports, or is there a democracy dimension here as well? And as a country like Costa Rica, which has such a deep experience on these issues, are there things that we should be aware of in terms of those growing relations?
Well, despite us negotiators, trade people saying that trade should be assessed apart from politics, the truth is that they're both absolutely naturally linked. The advancement of China's presence in the regional economies is without any doubt grown and continually growing. In the case of Costa Rica, we switched sides. We established diplomatic ties with China back in 2006, 2007, and we negotiated a free trade agreement with China. So far, I must say, this relationship hasn't delivered to the expectations that we had and to the size of such an economy, second global economy. Just for numbers to showcase, in the last 4 years, we have received $10 billion in terms of FDI, while from China in the same period we received $8.5 million. U.S. companies employ around 250,000 Costa Rican people, while Chinese companies employ 350 people in Costa Rica. So this showcases that there's something there, something that hasn't delivered, maybe lack of interest, or interest in other specific areas that we just don't offer to Chinese companies. But at the end of the day, of course, Costa Rica, we are a country that wants to diversify. We're expanding our trade platform with the Middle East, with the Gulf countries, with Israel, UAE, Saudi Arabia. Of course, Europe still remains our second trade partner, and tete-a-tete with the Central American market. We're seeking to expand relations under the Pacific Alliance with the South American countries. So we'll continue to diversify, but certainly the economic benefits of our trade relation with China and investment hasn't delivered to the expectations that we had.
I ask you that question because you gave a very timely interview recently with Politico magazine, where we had these similar conversations, and you went a little bit deeper into those topics. And I would encourage those who are interested more in the minister's views about China and the economic relationship, et cetera, to take a look at that interview, which just came out. It's very timely. Mr. Minister, I want to thank you for joining us here at Democracy Dialogues. What a terrific conversation. And one of the things that we are just so pleased to have the opportunity to do is to highlight the direct link between economic growth and democracy, and the things that lead to economic growth, including open trade and investment. And these are topics that for some reason have become politically controversial, but they are, and we need to talk about them in the democracy context. And so I really want to thank you for giving us that opportunity today to highlight those issues.
It's me who wants to thank you, Eric. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. And for those of you who have joined us, we want to thank all of you as well for joining us at Democracy Dialogues. As I mentioned, we come to you every month, and until then, let's work together to make sure that democracy delivers for all of us.